Democratic impeachment managers released an 80-page brief outlining their plans for the trial. Trump's defense lawyers responded with their own filing. Senate Republicans proposed a $618 billion proposal to counter Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief plan. What are some of the differences? And newly released footage shows Facebook CEO praising the new administration. Project Veritas published the video from an internal company meeting. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Trump's second impeachment trial is fast approaching. There's still debate as to whether or not it's constitutional, now that he's no longer in office. While some concerns linger, House Democrats are pushing full steam ahead. They unveiled an outline of their legal case on Tuesday. The 80-page brief argues former President Trump incited the mob that breached the Capitol on January 6th, that he's directly responsible and must be convicted so as to never hold office again. The 9 Democratic impeachment managers say in the legal brief this impeachment trial stems from the events at the Capitol. They allege Trump is personally responsible for an attack that unleashed death and mayhem at the Capitol amid the transfer of power. The 9 managers say in the joint statement, President Trump's incitement of insurrection requires his conviction and disqualification from future federal office holding. So is Trump responsible for the violence? Let's go back to January 6th. In his speech, he said protesters were going to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard at the Capitol. As protesters moved their demonstration to the U.S. Capitol, Trump had been posted on Twitter throughout the afternoon, urging his supporters to remain peaceful. He also released a video calling on his supporters to go home now. Twitter took down that video shortly after it went up. The FBI released information earlier this year that called into question the argument over if Trump caused the Capitol breach. The FBI says some people showed an intent to attack the Capitol before the president's remarks. The FBI says it has to determine the credibility and viability of each piece of information it gets. During the impeachment hearing, Pennsylvania Representative Scott Perry pointed to the FBI's discovery, saying, "How does the president incite an attack that was pre-planned and already underway before his speech concluded?" Now, I know my colleagues on the left want America to believe that the president inspired a spontaneous riot that they like to call an insurrection. But facts are stubborn things, even if you choose to ignore them. The congressman later said the burning, looting, and violence committed in the past year was closer to an insurrection than anything President Trump has said. Trump's defense team has since filed their response. The 14-page brief argues the impeachment trial is unconstitutional and should be dropped. The filing states the Senate of the United States lacks jurisdiction over the 45th president because he holds no public office from which he can be removed, rendering the article of impeachment moot. Trump's attorneys argue his remarks about the election are protected under the First Amendment. They write, "It is admitted that President Trump addressed a crowd at the Capitol ellipse on January 6th. As is his right under the First Amendment to the Constitution, and expressed his opinion that the election results were suspect, as is contained in the full recording of the speech." They argue the Senate doesn't have constitutional grounds for impeachment of a former president. On top of that, they say the House's article of impeachment was improperly drafted, calling the process a rush judgment, as the House skipped the customary hearings. The filing states the House of Representatives deprived the 45th president of due process of law and rushing to issue the article of impeachment by ignoring its own procedures and precedents going back to the mid-19th century. Adding the lack of due process included but was not limited to its failure to conduct any meaningful committee review or other investigation, engage in any full consideration of evidence in support of the article, as well as the failure to conduct any full and fair discussion by allowing the 45th president's positions to be heard in the House chamber. They asked the Senate to dismiss the article impeachment as moot, or in the alternative, the 45th president respectfully requests the Senate acquit him on the merits of the allegations raised in the article of impeachment. One of Trump's newly appointed attorneys, meanwhile, says the impeachment is tearing the country apart. He says Democrats are just trying to bar Trump from running for office again and called it a political weapon. Alabama Attorney David Schoen, speaking to Sean Hannity on Fox News, called it the most ill-advised legislative action he's seen in his life, adding it's a slap in the face for the 75 million voters who voted for Trump's re-election. He says that's about as undemocratic as you can get. Republicans have criticized the impeachment for its lack of due process, as it was completed in a single 7-hour session. The Democrat-controlled House voted to impeach Trump, presenting a single article. They allege he incited an insurrection that caused the U.S. Capitol breach. House Democrats, joined by 10 Republicans, impeached Trump, and now those Republicans are facing backlash. One representative says his family signed a petition disowning him for the move. Illinois Representative Adam Kinzinger told Business Insider that his own family circulated a petition disowning him. In an interview with Insider, he said his family disowned him because he's, quote, in the devil's army now. Another was formally censured by his state's Republican Party. In South Carolina, the state's GOP formally censured Representative Tom Rice over his vote to impeach Trump. The party said trying to impeach a president as he is leaving office is, quote, never legitimate and is nothing more than a political kick on the way out of the door. And now there's even a political action committee targeting all 10 of them. Former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski is launching a new political action committee. This one takes aim at the 10 Republican representatives who voted to impeach former President Trump. He told WMUR he believes those 10 House members have to have accountability at the end of the day. Lewandowski says he's focused on finding and supporting the primary challengers to these 10 Republicans, starting with Wyoming's Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Cheney's announcement calling for impeachment met with backlash, and a Trump-backed poll shows 73% of Cheney's constituents are unhappy with her. The impeachment trial in the Senate is set to start next week. Only 5 out of the necessary 17 Republicans voted against Senator Rand Paul's motion declaring the trial unconstitutional. For this reason, Trump is likely to be acquitted. That's because a 2/3 majority is needed for conviction. Now let's turn to pandemic relief. Senate Republicans proposed a $618 billion proposal to counter Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief plan. What are some of the differences? 9 Republican senators met with President Biden on Monday to offer their counterproposal. The proposals differ in other ways besides their overall size. Biden's plan includes $1,400 checks for Americans earning $75,000 or less. It's to top up the $600 checks sent out in December to reach the $2,000 Biden had originally promised. So far, this follows the line carved out by former President Trump. Trump was demanding $2,000 stimulus checks before he left office. The GOP plan instead offers $1,000 checks to a smaller subset of Americans, those earning under $40,000. The counterproposal offers $100 less than Biden's on unemployment. Its $300 weekly checks would run through June, and it offers no money to state or local governments. Biden also wants to raise the minimum wage to $15. The GOP proposal left this part out. The two plans have similarities too, both providing vaccine aid and certain provisions for small businesses. But the GOP senators remain hopeful to pass a relief bill with bipartisan support. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said after the meeting, the president had a substantive and productive discussion. Biden campaigned on his ability to reach across the aisle. Although Psaki said Biden sees a path forward, which doesn't rely on Republican support. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi introduced a budget resolution on Monday. They rallied behind Biden's $1.9 trillion plan. They said in a statement, "We are hopeful Republicans will work in a bipartisan manner to support assistance for their communities. But the American people cannot afford any more delays, and Congress must act to prevent more needless suffering." They said Congress has a responsibility to quickly deliver immediate comprehensive relief to the American people hurting from COVID-19. This would be the first step in potentially enacting a budget reconciliation bill, which would let Democrats pass the package even if no Republicans support it. That's because they hold majorities in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And while there has been some pushback against Biden's flurry of executive orders, there appears to be a fan. Newly released footage shows Facebook CEO praising the new administration. Project Veritas published the video from an internal company meeting. In a newly leaked video, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg praises President Biden's executive orders, many of which reversed Trump's previous actions.
In his first day, President Biden already issued a number of executive orders on areas that we as a company really care quite deeply about and have for some time. In areas like immigration, preserving DACA, and ending restrictions on travel from Muslim-majority countries.
He also mentioned Biden's actions on climate and advancing racial justice and equity. In the same meeting, the head of global affairs said there's been a lot of international backlash over Facebook's decision to suspend Trump from its platform.
Ideally, we wouldn't be taking these decisions on our own. We would be taking these decisions in line with and in conformity with democratically agreed rules and principles. And at the moment, those democratically agreed rules don't exist. We still have to take decisions in real time.
The company's VP of Civil Rights suggests all their products should take civil rights into account.
I wonder whether or not we can use Oculus to help a white police officer understand what it feels like to be a young black man who's stopped and searched and arrested by the police. And I want every major decision to run through a civil rights lens.
We reached out to Facebook for comment, but they didn't get back to us before airtime. Nonprofit watchdog Project Veritas says the Facebook insider who leaked the video is still at Facebook. And now Facebook recently brought on a new team member, former Obama official Roy Austin, who's going to serve as Vice President of Civil Rights and Deputy General Counsel for the company. In addition to his new role at Facebook, Austin is an Obama administration veteran and a member of President Biden's transition team. Before that, he served as a civil rights prosecutor and a Justice Department supervisor. In a release, Austin said he's excited to join the tech company amid what he called a national and global awakening happening around civil rights. He added that technology should be used to, quote, overcome the historic discrimination and hate which so many underrepresented groups have faced, rather than to exacerbate it. But the comments in his past positions have raised questions tied to political bias in big tech, at a time when a number of social media outlets have been accused of moderating user content unevenly. It isn't clear what Austin's specific responsibilities will be at Facebook, though the appointment underscores the closeness of Facebook to the Biden administration. A number of former Facebook decision makers also currently serve or have advised on the Biden administration. And meanwhile, conservative host Steven Crowder says he's suing Facebook over unfair competition, fraud, false advertising, and antitrust. His attorney said on Crowder's YouTube channel the lawsuit is already initiated. He accused Facebook of false advertising, antitrust violations, unfair competition, and fraud. According to Crowder's website, their goal is to stop unfair, deceptive acts. They are seeking monetary damages in the 7 figures. Crowder says in the clip his November 3rd election live stream was cut off and no reason was ever given. According to his website, they are prepared to take the case as far as they need to, even up to the Supreme Court level. They accuse Facebook of reducing their page's reach while favoring others. The suit is set to be filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. Following the January 6th Capitol breach, Facebook and other big tech companies suspended then-President Trump and a number of his supporters. The Trump administration has repeatedly called on Congress to repeal Section 230. The federal law protects the tech giants from being held liable for user-posted content. Trump and his administration repeatedly underscore the risks of unbalanced policing of user content on social media platforms. They claim that many tech companies are engaging in conduct that limits conservative viewpoints and stifles free speech. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.